We spoke last evening of the art of living, and today, as a logical consequence, we speak of the art of dying, because it is only those who live their life well, live a purposeful life, that can practice the art of dying. And the first element in the art of death is not to have the fear of death. Most die many times before the actual death arrives. He who fears death is already conquered by death, because fear is an advance agent of death. To get over that fear, one must know the real meaning of death. Death is not an end of things. Death is a passage. It is a passage to greater life. Death is a process of life. And how, you will ask? We live, we come to this life because there is a soul in each one of us which comes to birth to acquire experience and grow in consciousness. The body, the mind, the life, all these constitute an instrumentality, an instrumental being for acquiring that progress, developing that experience. And it is when this external instrumental being falls behind, lags behind, the soul which goes on progressing, when the body fails to serve the needs of the soul, that there is a disequilibrium, and we have disease, we have disintegration, and ultimately death. If a way could be found to coordinate the demands of the soul inside, the awakened being within us, and the movements of our external being, to establish a certain equilibrium between the two, death can be postponed with the promise of an eventual elimination of its possibility. Now first let us see what happens actually when we die, when one dies. As I said, to give you a background, as from a central fire millions of sparks come out, so from the central spirit, the divine reality, millions and millions of sparks have issued That's the line from the Upanishad. And each such spark goes on developing through various grades of life till it becomes a kind of an entity, a person in whom this divine spark, which is a concentration of divine consciousness, has not yet acquired articulation, has not yet become an entity, we say of him, he has no soul. But it only means that he has not arrived at a stage in his evolution when there is a conscious entity within. The soul spark becomes a soul entity. The soul entity develops into an inner being and it grows. Each time it assembles, gathers all the experience that it chooses, assimilates it in itself and grows and grows across births and births till it grows into a stature where it can meet the divine parent Godhead. It becomes one with the divine fire. Now a person, he is about to die. At the moment of death, the soul is conscious. Whether one is aware of the soul or not, the soul is conscious of the moment of death. And it looks back, has a flashback as it were, and in a split second it reviews all the main high points of the life, the career that is just ending. And based upon what it has experienced, it makes a choice of the line of experience it is going to have in its next birth. It is in this sense that we say that each one chooses his fate. The soul chooses the fate, the destiny, the line of progress, the line of experience it is going to have. Sri Aurobindo once explained rather humorously how a person who has been a king, enjoyed dominion, exercised power, may choose, that soul may choose to be a cobbler in the next birth in order to have experience of humility, of service, of humbleness. So the soul chooses, and then it leaves the body. But is that the end? It is only the physical body that is left. But the soul has other bodies. We have a very old Upanishad called the Taittiriya Upanishad, which speaks that behind the physical material body of food there is the greater body of life. Behind the life body there is the mind body. Behind the mind body there is the knowledge body. And behind the knowledge body there is the bliss body. And expressively it calls each body as a sheath, kosha, which can be cast off and is indeed cast off. So each soul has as many as 5 bodies, 5 sheaths. It is only the external physical body that is cast off. And the moment of separation from the physical body, the soul goes into a swoon, and when it wakes up, if the death has been sudden, if the death has been painful, one doesn't know that one is dead. The soul seeks for its physical body, but the physical body is not there. Instead, the soul finds itself in a kind of replica of this physical terrestrial scene. Everything that one has known here, seen, worked for, desired, is there in an idealized form. If a person has lived a bright life, done good things, led a gentle life of gentleness, kindness, faith, trust in God, done good, he finds himself in bright surroundings, having all that goodness and good, having all happiness, and this is called heaven. If a person has lived a dark life, hurt others, made himself miserable, always tended to look into the dark side of things, lived violently, all those scenes are there again in an idealized form, and that is called hell. Heaven and hell are not geographical locations in any cosmic map. They are our own projections of our psychological states from the physical into the supraphysical sphere. So it is in that sense that the ancients used to say that each one carries his heaven and hell in himself. That is the subtle physical universe where everything is an extension of this place, and one lives there in one's own heaven or one's own hell according to the predilections that one has developed in the life on earth. After this kind of projection fades away, then one moves into the world of life called the vital world, the pranaloka, where one finds oneself in a vital body of vital sheath, which consists of desires, greeds, and such movements which one has lived, which one has cultivated, and which stick like a tight coat. The soul is not free to go, and one has to stay in this vital world till these desires, unsatisfied greed, ambitions, and all these movements are worked out. One is obliged to stay there. If some of these desires are very violent, they ask to be worked out in the raw. And if it is, for instance, a desire, greed for food, which one has not got over, not conquered during life on earth, that part of the vital body detaches itself and comes into the earth atmosphere and gets into a creature, maybe a human being, maybe a pig, which is very fond of eating. The poor pig may be sleeping. Suddenly this thing gets into it, and the pig gets into a frenzy and runs about and eats and satisfies its desire. Similarly, if one has sex desire, may go into a goat. Now these are all certain occult truths which have been put in the form of stories and legends, fairy tales, that the human beings come back as this animal or that animal, as if to pay for their sins. The truth is this: once a soul has crossed the animal belt and come into the human body, as a rule, it does not go back. It cannot go back. That's the law of evolution. But it is these unsatisfied desires, unsatisfied greeds and movements of the vital that pull one back constantly and keep one into the vital world till one gets over them. And it is for this reason that one has to take steps when one is alive, one is in the body, to get over these desires, get over these attachments, get over these obsessions for food, drink, sex and things, not because they are sinful or otherwise, but because they draw this soul downward. The art of life, as far as this is concerned, is to eliminate progressively these movements of desire, movements of greed and attachment, which pull one down and fix one to earthly things. So it is said that the older a person becomes, the easier is the death. Because as one gets older and older, the hold of the external nature, lower nature, diminishes, and one gets a little detached from the external life. But it is in our power, in our hands, to develop that detachment at any age that we like. Once we know the truth, we can take steps in our day-to-day life to develop a certain aloofness, detachment, control, and even acquire a conquest over these vital moments. The vital sheath, after all these things are exhausted, falls away, and one moves into the world of mind, the mental world, and becomes conscious of the mental sheath, mental body, which one can't shake off. And this mental body again consists of ideas, beliefs, creeds, all to which one has fanatically clung, to which one has held fanatically in one's life. And all these things need to be worked out. So those who limit themselves in knowledge, stick to a few doctrines, condemn everything else, they have the greatest difficulty in this sphere, because all those stick and don't allow one freedom to go. They have to be worked, they have to be thinned out, and it is only after this mental sheath also is cast that the soul is free in its causal body to go into the world of peace, into the psychic world, where it goes into a deep, deep slumber and assimilates the experience of the past, relates it to the experience of the still earlier births, and prepares itself for the next incarnation. Just as What we do on the level of our vital life influences how we are going to deal with the situation in the vital world. Similarly, with the mind. If we choose to keep the mind limited and narrow, enslaved to certain dogmas and doctrines, we are going to have difficulty. But if we keep the mind open to knowledge from all sides, keep the mind plastic, resilient, this difficulty is not there. So it is again in our hands to prepare for a healthy mental body, open, plastic, by cultivating an attitude of open mind in our mental life. Now what happens after? There are the guardians of the psychic world, the angels, if you may call it, and they help the slumbering soul to assimilate that experience. And when the time comes for its rebirth, it sees a point of light in the earth zone. That point of light is there where the soul can have its chosen line of experience in the most favorable environment. And the soul plunges downward and it hovers round the womb of the coming child. It is a wrong notion that the soul enters into the womb when the child is still within the body. That body of a child is too tender to support a soul. Normally, it is only when the child is delivered that the soul enters into the body. At times, if the soul is advanced, if the soul is highly developed, it hovers around again and again for some weeks, for some months in the atmosphere, prepares the body of the child, and then alone enters. At times, however, what happens? When it sees the point of light and is coming down, there are the forces of the adversary, the black host. They deliberately deflect the course of this coming soul, and the soul finds itself in a wrong body. When the soul realizes that it has been encased in a wrong body, it decides to leave, and that explains why we have many premature deaths at the childhood stage. When children die prematurely, it is largely as a result of this kind of deflection of the choice of the soul. And any kind of nominal illness, any kind of little accident which need not have caused death, causes death. And the soul gradually develops. Now it is in this background that we have to understand how the way we live, the way we attach meaning to our life, that decides what happens after death. The art of dying, the way to meet death, is first to lose the fear of death. And the only way to lose the fear of death is to understand the meaning of death. Death is not a termination. Death is a transition. When the body, when the encasement, triple encasement, is no longer serviceable for the purposes of the inner soul, the soul casts it aside. In the Gita, in the second chapter, we have a very profound verse. It says, just as one casts away the old clothes when they are old and takes the new, the soul also casts away the body and takes new ones. The soul has the choice. The soul continues. There is a continuity of consciousness in the soul. And all culture, all real civilization, all spiritual training is meant to communicate this sense of continuity of consciousness to the mind, to the life, and to the body. As long as we live on the surface, from moment to moment, without being aware of the large element of which we are unconscious, we are subject to the pangs of death. But if we have that knowledge, that perception, and practice that discipline by which we realize that this physical life that we live is only the outermost layer. We have a deeper life, a life of mind, a life of emotions, and a life of the soul, which are not interrupted by death. Then death becomes a process of life. Life renews itself. Sri Aurobindo explains in his Life Divine how life renews itself through the process of death. As life fulfills itself, it comes to a point when it doesn't have a further objective. Instead of continuing the same round again and again, it chooses to cast off the old body and take a fresh line of experience, fresh line of adventure, fresh line of growth in another body. So the death really is of the physical body, and even that is not inevitable. Death is there, has to be there, as long as we choose to live in ignorance. Pain is the signature of ignorance. To quote a line from Savitri of Sri Aurobindo, pain is the hammer of gods to break a dead resistance in the mortal's heart. Without pain, without suffering, man would not budge an inch. He would be satisfied to live like a cabbage. It is the estrus, it is the urge of pain inside that pushes him forward. And the culmination is death. But if we take steps to move away from ignorance, the ignorance recedes, and as knowledge advances, pain becomes less. The hold of disease and disintegration becomes less. And one has the duration of life to a certain extent within one's control. To the extent we shift our center of functioning, center of daily reference, from the physical, mental, vital complex that is on the surface, we shift it inwards and inwards. To that extent we get control over death. But conquest of death is not entirely an individual affair. For millions of years there has been a collective suggestion that a thing that is born has got to die. Even the cells in our body spontaneously, automatically obey a law of birth, growth, decay and death. When my teacher, the mother, was engaged in a process as part of the yoga of self-perfection, of transforming the cells in order to divinize the body, she found that each cell insisted on owning allegiance to this law of death. And when she tried to impose on it a new law by suggestion, constant suggestion, cajoling, to transfer its allegiance to another law, a law of unending progress, birth, growth and more growth and further growth, the cells would be sullen and would not respond. They would resist, and that resistance in the cells found its expression as intense pain, intense agony in the physical body. Attendants around the mother would call doctors, but she would say, it is not a medical problem, you don't understand. It is something inner. And she went on persisting, and as a cell or a group of cells responded, there would be a sudden outburst of bliss in the body. And she said, there are millions of cells in our body, and it takes a long time, at least 300 years after one has realized the immortal consciousness in the body, one has realized, not only realized, but cast the entire nature into the mold of this divinized soul. After that it takes 300 years. But she added, there is an X factor called grace, the grace of the divine. And we do not know how long. It may be done in a trice. But till it happens, the process of conquest of death, the process of immortalization of the physical body is in the secret womb of nature. Immortalization of the body does not mean one has to helplessly live in the same physical body for millions of years. No, it only means one does not die. That is, I am not obliged to leave my body, but I can choose to change my body anytime I want. And this truth is called in the Indian tradition Ichha Mrityu, that is, death at will. We have still instances in contemporary history in India, among those who practice yoga, among those who are dedicated entirely to God, who decide the hour and the date and the month when they will leave the body. And at that particular moment, they assume that lotus position, tell everyone concerned, take leave, and then concentrate and leave. So that is not a superstitious belief, but a realizable fact. And all the experiments that are going on in California at the moment to realize the perfectibility of the body, enhance the powers of the body through sport, through games, through physical culture, they are all in the right direction. Though the ultimate solution cannot be found on the level of body, physical solution, but it has to come from the level, from the end of consciousness, still that man aspires to conquer death at the physical level, to make the body immune to the law of disease and death. That is an indication that the time has arrived when man has to make an effort to conquer this terrestrial law of death whose time has come. And the art of dying is to cast our daily life into this mold of the possibility of averting death one day, delaying death, finding an equilibrium in ourselves which keeps death at bay. And when death does actually arrive, to be prepared for it, losing one's fear for it, accept it as a process of life, as a door to greater life. If you have any questions, you are welcome to ask. Yes, I think I explained it yesterday. The Atman, the self, is what we call the spirit. Each form in existence has supporting it this presence, what we call the self, the Atman. It is unchanging, it is immutable, it is eternal. But this stands outside evolution. A projection of it is inside the movement of evolution, and that is called Antaratman. Atman is what stands here. Antaratman is the inner soul, the inner self. And this projection of the Atman, which is the spark, that grows, and that is the soul which changes its vesture, which grows in its consciousness and stature, and unites with God, unites with the divine consciousness. The self always supports it from behind. This is called the Antaratman, and this is called the Atman. In Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, it is called the psychic being. Psychic being, which is the soul in evolution. Yes?
I think about the second sentence that you said, and you said something about we die many times. We're triggered by that many times before we actually die.
Because we are afraid of death. We are afraid of death. And in a deeper sense, you as a scientist would corroborate that our cells die every moment and new cells are born. So this fact of the present moment, the present cells dying and new things coming, shows it is a constant thing that is going on. Only it does not make an impact on our outer mind, because fortunately the mind is ignorant. That is one. Second is, by being always afraid, something in us dies. Each time I may die, this may happen to me, something that at the subtle level, something actually dies. And that is why we say, fear attracts the object of fear.
Is fear evidence of something dying in a way? I mean,
Fear is the agent of death. It hastens death. It hastens our movement towards death, because it destroys our defenses. It weakens our strongholds of faith. So either one must have a clear intellectual and a mental analysis and a grasp, or one must have faith in the divine protection, in the divine will. There is a divine will. Nothing can happen to me against the divine will. And what the divine will wants to happen, well, I accept it. If I have that faith and that fortitude, I am afraid of nothing. I am a no, unless the hour has come, I am not going to die. I believe it was Napoleon who said, the bullet that is going to kill me has not yet been cast.
Along that same line, what is the meaning and purpose of disease like cancer and the means of overcoming cancer?
There are certain diseases which are not normal. They are results of intrusions of subtle physical or vital elements from the occult regions to deform human life. Many viruses are really the movements of these subtle elements. As far as cancer is concerned, whatever may be the conclusions of medicine, and they are changing, the occult perception is that the seed of it is greed. Greed in cells. When there is greed, the cells start multiplying. They break the law of growth and they furiously start multiplying. I remember in our ashram when mother once said that this greed is at the bottom of this growth of cells, cancerous cells. One of my colleagues, he died and found he had cancer in the head, brain. So I asked mother, I had understood that greed must be for greed for food or greed for such things. He said, but why did he have, if he had greed, he should have had cancer in the stomach. Why did he have cancer in the head, brain? She said he had ambition. An ambition to be somebody, something to which one is not entitled. That creates certain movements inside, false movements, and those cells start multiplying. So that is an occult explanation for this growth and multiplication of cells. That is one. Certain diseases are caused by mischievous forces, mischievous beings, like possession, accidents, tumors. They are not necessarily healthy diseases. There are what are called healthy diseases. There are what are called diseases caused by the intrusion of other elements. Though medical science will not admit it in the present stage, I suppose a time will come when it will recognize this fact. Yeah.
An acquaintance of mine was clinically dead for a few minutes after a heart attack, and then he was brought back. And he described an experience where he was free and blissful and soaring high above the land where he was at. Was this the subtle physical that he had gone into briefly, do you think, or was it?
I think this experience is...
He didn't want to come back. He didn't want to come back at all.
This experience is fairly common. I believe there is a book also published recently collecting all such experiences, of people who were on the surgical table and have excess of chloroform or anesthesia or whatever it is. They left and they were hovering around and they were watching what these people are talking, and then they meet a being of light or whatever it is. Fairly uniform experience. It is the soul finds itself suddenly released from physical clamps and it goes. But its career is not ended. That's why it has to come back. Each soul has a certain thing to complete an experience. Till that round is completed, the soul is not free to go. So it comes back and it has to complete its account. It is the subtle physical. You know what is called OEB, out of the body experience, OBE.
I believe, and either in your writings or the mother's writings, where your thought are centered at the moment of death determines the great determiner of the direction of whether you will return to the mother at that moment or whether you will have to go through a rather torturous route through many shedding of sheets and various things.
All those things, they have to be gone through. Only if at the moment of death we have a sufficient spiritual culture, a habit of trusting to the divine will, divine providence and protection, if we have developed the habit of entrusting ourselves to a higher light and a higher guidance, automatically, at the moment of leaving, one remembers, and that brings into the situation a protecting hand which always guides one through that difficult passage, gives it rest, and one doesn't have to go through the period of confusion of trying to find out where one is, feeling distressed in a totally hostile environment where all kinds of beings and forces come and try to gobble you up. All that. These things happen particularly in cases of suicide. When a person commits suicide, it is the soul, it is a denial of the soul's right to live. Because the outer mind or the outer being is frustrated or can't meet a situation, you just commit suicide. And when one wakes up, the soul finds the body is not there. One tries to rush back into the physical body, but it is not there. One realizes what an enormity of crime one has done in killing the body. And at that time, all these elementals, hostiles, come and try to eat up one. It is at that time our prayers for peace, the grace of God, all these are to be invoked. And nothing has been solved, because that person will have to start from that very point in the next birth. The problem has to be faced again and met.
I think this was again, I can't remember whether it was your writing, but the concept that the avatar really is the only person that can really die, because death the death that we're talking about is a mechanical, unconscious process, like just taking off the shedding some clothing. It's a mechanical procedure, whereas the avatar has to do this consciously.
No.
By choice. No.
Even yogins, those who have developed a consciousness, who are conscious of their movements, they select their hour of death and consciously leave the body. I have seen people leaving the body consciously. They are not avatars. It doesn't need to be an avatar for that. It is within the realms of possibility for you and me if we practice the yoga of consciousness, increasing the quantum of consciousness in everything that we do. Recognize and feel the consciousness in everything around. Develop consciousness in the mind, in the heart, in the body itself. Then one can live consciously and die consciously. Yeah.
Well, isn't that a form of suicide? I mean, I don't understand if these people can, decide I'm gonna leave my body at that particular hour.
People, yeah, good question, good question. People who have that capacity to leave their body at will, they don't decide according to their arbitrary mental will. They are always open to the language and the communication of the soul. And the soul decides to go when its hour has come, when the divine will. The soul doesn't have a separate will from the divine will. And when the divine will is there, the person becomes conscious, he knows, and he says that moment. No yogi, no person who has that power acts on his own self-will. Long before that, one has merged one's personal will with the divine higher will.
The passage from, say, the vital to the mental,
Yeah.
is this sort of like a long tenure, like a lifetime?
No.
It leaves in the vital realm and then it's passing like another death? Or is it...
No. It is more or less, shedding of the sheaths. It is called shedding of the sheaths. It is fairly rapid in case of people who have learned to detach themselves from things. It is a little painful and long in case of people who stick to things. But in terms of time, it is difficult to say. Difficult to say.
Are they going to go through the shedding of sheets and come back also into another body?
They are not evolutionary beings of the type that you and I are. There are certain great beings who are specially sent from the divine to participate in the evolution of humanity, contribute, open new paths, lead them. And they are not those who are obliged to take birth and obliged to, take rebirth and all that. A person like Vivekananda, a person like Sri Aurobindo, Mother, they are not evolutionary beings. They are special projections of a consciousness which will live in the earth atmosphere as long as the work for which they came is fulfilled. That is why one still has a response when one prays, when one thinks of Krishna, Rama, Jesus, and some great figures. They are called the immortal because they just don't fade away. They are not obliged. When their work is done, they merge into the infinite spirit from where they issued directly.